There are moments in global politics when the most important decisions are not announced on television, not revealed in official speeches, and not discussed openly in front of cameras. Instead, they appear quietly in small reports, brief conversations between officials, or short leaks that suddenly begin circulating through diplomatic circles and intelligence communities. At first, they look like ordinary rumors. Then analysts begin to compare fragments of information. Military observers notice unusual movements. Security officials start using different language. And slowly, a picture begins to emerge that is far bigger and far more dangerous than it first seemed. Something like that may now be unfolding behind the scenes of the current crisis surrounding Iran's nuclear program. Because according to recent discussions reported by insiders, one of the most extraordinary military options imaginable has quietly entered the conversation in Washington. Not another round of sanctions, not another diplomatic ultimatum, but a scenario that sounds almost like the plot of a high-risk military thriller. A scenario in which American special forces could potentially be sent directly into Iranian territory with one very specific objective: to seize control of part of Iran's nuclear material before it can be transformed into a weapon. At first glance, the idea sounds almost impossible. Iran is not a small, isolated facility that can be easily surrounded. It is a large country with one of the most complex security structures in the Middle East. The nuclear infrastructure itself is scattered across multiple locations, many of them heavily fortified, deeply buried underground, and protected by layers of military defenses. But according to analysts familiar with the debate, the discussion is not about destroying facilities from the air. That option has been debated for years. What makes this conversation different is the idea of physically capturing nuclear material, specifically a stockpile that has become one of the most sensitive elements in the entire standoff between Iran and the West. That material is uranium enriched to roughly 60%. In nuclear terms, that number matters enormously. Natural uranium contains less than 1% of the isotope needed for nuclear reactions. Civilian nuclear power plants usually require enrichment levels of around 3 to 5%. But once uranium reaches 60%, the technological barrier to weapons-grade material becomes dramatically smaller. Experts often describe it as the point where the final step toward 90% enrichment, the level generally associated with nuclear weapons, becomes much faster and technically easier. And according to the latest estimates circulating in policy discussions, Iran now possesses roughly 450 kilograms of uranium enriched to that 60% level. For nuclear specialists, that amount immediately raises serious questions. Because if such material were further enriched, it could potentially provide the core material for multiple nuclear devices. The exact number depends on technical factors and weapon design. But the key point is not the precise figure. The key point is timing. Intelligence assessments have repeatedly warned that once a country reaches this stage of enrichment, the time required to convert that material into weapons-grade uranium can shrink dramatically, in some cases to a matter of weeks. Weeks, not years. Weeks, not months. And that is exactly why this particular stockpile has become one of the central concerns in strategic planning discussions. But the story becomes even more complicated when you consider where this material might be located and how it could be protected. Iranian nuclear facilities are not simple warehouses with barrels sitting in the open. Many of them are part of hardened complexes built specifically to survive military attack. Some are buried beneath mountains. Others are protected by multiple layers of security, including Revolutionary Guard units, electronic surveillance, air defense systems, and underground tunnels. The idea that foreign commandos could somehow reach such a location, secure nuclear material, and remove it safely may sound like something from a Hollywood script. And yet, according to the emerging reports, planners have at least begun analyzing whether such a mission could theoretically be possible under certain circumstances. What makes this possibility even more unsettling is not only the quantity of enriched uranium involved, but the complex web of strategic calculations that would surround any attempt to physically seize it. Because once a scenario like this enters serious military planning, the discussion immediately expands far beyond a single warehouse or centrifuge hall. Suddenly, the conversation includes infiltration routes, satellite surveillance patterns, electronic warfare capabilities, air defense suppression, and the question that every strategist eventually asks in private rooms: what happens if the operation fails? And in a country like Iran, failure would not simply mean aborting a mission. It could trigger a chain of events that spreads across an entire region already filled with armed factions, missile arsenals, and fragile political balances. To understand why the debate has become so intense, you have to look at how nuclear materials are usually stored and protected once they reach advanced enrichment levels. Uranium enriched to 60% is typically converted into chemical forms that can be stored in cylinders or containers designed to maintain stability and safety. These containers are often placed inside facilities with strict environmental controls, constant monitoring, and multiple redundant security layers. But in the case of Iran's nuclear infrastructure, the protective measures go even further. Several known facilities were designed from the very beginning with the expectation that they might eventually become targets of sabotage or military strikes. That is why some of them are buried under thick layers of rock or reinforced concrete, while others are surrounded by air defense systems that include radar networks, missile batteries, and rapid response units. Now imagine what it would take for a foreign special operations force to reach such a location. The operation would not start at the facility gates. It would begin days or even weeks earlier, with surveillance satellites tracking guard rotations, communications intercepts mapping internal security networks, and cyber units attempting to disable alarms or disrupt radar coverage. Aircraft capable of electronic warfare might be positioned nearby to interfere with detection systems. Reconnaissance drones could quietly map terrain and identify potential entry points. And somewhere in the middle of that invisible preparation, a small group of operators would begin moving toward the objective, carrying equipment designed not for combat alone, but for handling nuclear material safely. Because seizing enriched uranium is not like capturing documents or destroying machinery. It requires specialized containers, radiation protection procedures, and transport systems capable of moving extremely sensitive material without contamination or loss. Even the weight of the material becomes a factor. 450 kilograms of enriched uranium is not something that can simply be carried away in backpacks. It would require careful packaging, secure transport, and an extraction plan that could move the material quickly before local forces had time to respond. And that leads to another critical question that analysts quietly debate. How long would such a team realistically have before Iranian security forces reacted? Facilities linked to the nuclear program are believed to have rapid response units stationed nearby. In some cases, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps maintains direct responsibility for protecting strategic sites. If an alarm were triggered, helicopters, armored vehicles, and reinforcement units could begin moving toward the location within minutes, which means any operation attempting to capture nuclear material would likely have to unfold at incredible speed. Entering, securing the site, locating the specific storage area, packaging the uranium, and extracting it before the surrounding security perimeter fully mobilized. Some military planners argue that the only way such a mission could succeed would involve simultaneous operations. One team securing the material, another disabling communications, another suppressing air defenses, possibly even diversionary actions designed to pull security forces away from the real target. The complexity quickly becomes enormous. And yet, this is exactly the type of scenario that elite special operations units train for over many years. Missions that combine intelligence, speed, and precision under extreme pressure. But even if such a mission succeeded tactically, the strategic consequences would be impossible to ignore. Iran would almost certainly view the seizure of nuclear material inside its territory as an act of war. The response might not come immediately in the form of direct confrontation. Instead, it could unfold through missile strikes against regional bases, cyber attacks targeting infrastructure, or actions carried out by allied groups across the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important energy corridors on the planet, could suddenly become a flashpoint. Shipping lanes might close. Oil prices could spike overnight. Regional governments would be forced to make rapid decisions about alliances and responses. And this is where the entire discussion becomes even more complex. Because while military planners evaluate tactical possibilities, political leaders must weigh risks that extend far beyond a single operation. Would seizing the uranium delay Iran's potential weapon capability long enough to justify the consequences? Would it accelerate Iran's determination to build nuclear weapons even faster? Would it push other countries in the region to pursue their own nuclear deterrence? These are the kinds of questions that do not have simple answers, which is why debates around them often remain hidden from public view. Another factor that quietly influences these discussions is time. Intelligence assessments frequently focus on what analysts call breakout time, the period required for a country to produce enough weapons-grade material for a nuclear device once the decision is made. If a stockpile already enriched to 60% exists, that breakout time can shrink dramatically. Some estimates suggest that moving from 60% enrichment to weapons-grade 90% could theoretically be achieved within a matter of weeks if sufficient centrifuge capacity is available. That narrow timeline is exactly what creates urgency in strategic conversations. But there is also uncertainty. Intelligence about the precise location and status of nuclear materials is never perfect. Stockpiles may be moved. Facilities may contain hidden chambers. New underground sites could exist that remain undiscovered. Any operation based on incomplete information carries enormous risk. And this uncertainty is part of what keeps the debate alive inside policy circles. So the question now quietly circulating among analysts is not simply whether such an operation could happen. The real question is whether circumstances might arise that would make leaders believe they have no other option left. If diplomatic negotiations collapse, if enrichment levels increase further, if intelligence suddenly indicates that weaponization steps are accelerating. In those moments, decisions that once seemed unthinkable can suddenly move to the top of strategic planning. And this is why the current situation is being watched so closely by experts around the world. Because sometimes the most significant shifts in global security begin not with explosions or speeches, but with quiet discussions behind closed doors. Discussions about contingencies, scenarios, and operations that may never be carried out, but are nevertheless being planned. If you have followed this analysis this far, you are already part of a small group of viewers who want to understand what may be unfolding behind the headlines. So take a moment right now to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because the next developments in this story could reshape not only the future of Iran's nuclear program, but the entire balance of power across the Middle East. And perhaps the most unsettling question remains unanswered. If a mission like this were ever launched, would the world even know it was happening while it was still underway? Or would the first sign appear only after everything was already over? A sudden announcement, a mysterious operation, a stockpile that has somehow disappeared. And by the time the public begins to understand what happened, the geopolitical landscape may already have changed in ways that no one fully expected.